I was pouring water in the teapot when the phone rang with that insistence that seems to pierce the bones. I answered thinking it was a neighbor asking for sugar, as always. But the voice on the other end was cold, professional, too distant to match my morning silence. She said that she was talking about the city hall and that there was a request to sell my house in my name. For a moment, I thought I had heard it wrong. The woman repeated the information, and I felt my hands tremble, pouring some water on the floor. Sell my house? I asked, trying to keep the calm I didn't have. She confirmed and said that I needed to attend to check irregularities. My heart was beating at a pace I didn't recognize. The house was all I had. It was where my husband hugged me before bed, where I raised my daughter, where my whole world had happened. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the teapot as if he could explain to me what was going on. Light poured in dimly through the window, illuminating the dust particles in the air, but nothing seemed real. Those words hammered in my head like a threat I would never have imagined facing at 72. The sale of my house, in my name, without me knowing. I took a deep breath and tried to convince myself that there must be a mistake. Maybe someone typed the name wrong, maybe they confused the addresses, maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I always believed that big problems only happen to other people, never to me. What nonsense. Life does not choose who shakes. It shakes those who least expect it. I sat at the table and took my agenda, trying to write down the time of the visit to the city hall. But when I opened the drawer where I keep my pens, I realized that a small old case, which was always there, was no longer there. It belonged to my mother, one of the few objects that remained of her. First I felt confusion, then a chill down my spine. It was not possible. I got up and started to quickly look at the shelves, pulling cabinet doors, checking drawers. Some objects seemed out of place. They just weren't there anymore. The blue vase in the living room, which I had inherited from my grandmother, was not on the side table. I thought, did I borrow it? Did I keep it somewhere else? But I never changed my position at all. Suddenly, the call from the city hall made more sense than I would have liked. I felt a wave of heat rise up my face, something between fear and indignation. Who would handle my things? Who would have access to my house? I felt the ground open up beneath my feet, as if every memory stored there was threatened with disappearing. I called my daughter's name, Tanya, even though she no longer lived with me. It was instinct, perhaps hope, but the bad feeling did not pass. She came less than before, and when she did, she was usually too hurried to notice my old objects. Or I thought I was. The silence inside the house seemed to mock me, as if it was keeping a secret that everyone already knew, except me. I walked down the hallway, putting my hand against the wall for support. I've never felt so fragile, so exposed, so wrong. I needed to find out what was going on, but part of me feared the answer. I looked again at the phone, still on the table, as if it could ring again and undo everything, but he remained motionless. I took a deep breath and realized that this was just the beginning, a beginning that I didn't ask for, but that would change every part of my life, and, perhaps, it would reveal truths that I never wanted to know. If you are feeling Helena's anguish along with me, subscribe to the channel now. That helps a lot and you don't miss any chapter of this story. Still stunned by the call, I began to walk around the house more closely, as if examining a body for invisible wounds. With every corner I looked, the feeling of loss increased. My father's watch, the pocket watch I kept on the sideboard, was no longer there. I ran my hand over the top as if I could feel it in memory, but the emptiness was too real. I went to the living room shelf, and the frames with old photos seemed incomplete. One of the most special, the one on my first trip with my husband, was gone. The space left by her was like a hole inside me. I felt a lump in my throat and had to support myself so as not to lose my balance. I thought about calling Tanya, but something in me hesitated. For the past few weeks, she seemed so distant, responding to my messages coldly, showing up only when she needed something. I didn't want to believe that she could be involved. The idea hurt me like a slow stab. I walked to the bedroom and opened my closet. I looked at the boxes where I keep memories of my mother, my grandmother, old letters. And one of the boxes was out of place, an open lid, missing objects. Again, that tightness in the chest, as if someone had touched my soul without my permission. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I couldn't just ignore that. Things had been fading for weeks and I only realized it now because the call shook me like thunder. Maybe I was trying not to see it. Maybe I was afraid to admit the obvious. I decided to turn on the television to distract myself, but I ended up stopping at the home screen, where online ads appeared. One of them caught my attention, an old blue vase, identical to mine. The same shade of blue, the same pattern on the edges. My heart beat faster. Clicked. The photos showed exactly my vase. I would recognize it even with my eyes closed. But what really destroyed me was seeing the seller's name in the profile description. A name I knew better than mine. Tanya. My daughter. I stared at the screen without breathing, hoping it was a mistake, a coincidence, a joke in bad taste. But the more I analyzed, the clearer it became that this was not a mistake. It was real. It was intentional. It was a betrayal that I was not prepared to face. I held the phone tightly, my hands shaking. One part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part, the most hurt part, needed to understand why. Before any fight, I needed answers. And answers come not from screaming voices, but from careful steps. I turned off the television, put my cell phone on the table and took a deep breath. If my daughter was selling my things, so that meant there was a lot more behind this story. And I was about to find out everything, even if the truth tore me apart. I spent the whole morning looking at the advertisement for the vase, trying to find the courage to call Tanya. The silence of the house seemed to push me towards it, as if each missing object screamed her name. When I finally dialed, my hand was shaking so much that I almost dropped my phone. She answered with the same impatience as always, as if I were an inconvenience in her routine. I asked, in a choked voice, if she had come home recently. She answered vaguely, saying that she stopped by, quickly, to get some things. Her tone hit me like a knife edge, cold, distant, almost angry. As if I were exaggerating, as if my feelings were too small to deserve attention. Trying to keep my composure, I asked directly about the blue vase. There was a silence on the other end of the line, one of those that last seconds but seem like hours. Tanya finally said that she didn't know what I was talking about, that maybe I had kept it wrong. The lie was so obvious that it went through me like a blade. I felt my eyes water, but I didn't let it show through my voice. I asked her if she had advertised something on the internet. She snorted, annoyed, saying that I was getting confused again, that I was always making up problems. That phrase destroyed me more than any lost object. It was as if she was trying to diminish me, to silence me inside my own home. I took a deep breath and ended the call before my voice broke. I stood there, holding the cell phone as if it were a foreign object, completely out of my hands. I knew my daughter, or thought he knew. But in that moment, I felt like she was a stranger wearing the face of someone I'd loved all my life. I walked into the living room and sat in the armchair where my husband used to read. I closed my eyes and tried to remember Tanya as a child, her laughter, her small arms hugging me. It was difficult to reconcile the image of that girl with the cold woman who treated me like dead weight. The sense of loss was almost physical. The rest of the afternoon passed like a fog. I walked around the house and every corner seemed to judge me, as if asking why I let everything get to this point. But the truth is that we never expect to be betrayed by those we love the most. We think that blood ties are indestructible, until I realized that they can be used as chains. I made a tea, but the taste seemed too bitter. My stomach churned, my head ached, and anguish grew like an animal waking up inside me. I knew I needed to find out the truth, but I was afraid of what I would find, fear of what else Tanya would be able to hide. When night fell, I sat down again in front of the computer and opened the ad again. I looked at the vase as if it were a symbol of my own fragility exposed to the world. And it was there, facing that image, that I made my decision. I would go after the truth, even if it completely destroyed me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Insomnia had robbed me of any sense of rest, but at the same time, there was something restless about me, as if the truth was waiting outside to be plucked out of the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath and decided that I would no longer be paralyzed. I took out my cell phone and opened the vase ad again. This time, something new caught my attention. There were more objects listed by the same seller. Among them, I recognized a jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother. My heart pounded, as if trying to get out of my chest. It was no longer a coincidence. It was premeditated. It was cruel. I clicked on the buyer's profile and found a pickup address marked on one of the sales. It wasn't far. My stomach turned, but I felt a strange strength inside me, a courage I didn't know. It was as if fear had turned into something sharper, more determined. I put on a simple outfit, did my hair as best I could and grabbed my bag. Before leaving, I looked at the whole house, trying to keep every detail. There was a sense of farewell in the air, as if I was leaving behind the fragile woman I had always been accepted to be. Maybe I really was. The street was silent, and the cold wind hit my face, awakening my senses. At every step, I felt the gravity of the decision I was making. It could be dangerous, it could be humiliating, but it was necessary. I needed to know who was taking my items, and why. When I arrived at the address, it was a small antique store. The windows were covered with old posters, and the door creaked as it opened. The smell of aged wood and dust hit me immediately, bringing a strange mixture of nostalgia and alertness. The store was almost empty except for a man behind the counter. He looked at me with surprise, as if he already recognized me. He frowned, restless. It was a familiar face in some way that I couldn't identify. With a trembling voice, I asked if he was Murillo, the name that appeared in the ads. He confirmed, but he looked uncomfortable, as if he was waiting for this moment to come. I said my name and mentioned the vase. The man turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated, looking away, like someone carrying a secret too heavy to keep hidden. I noticed a strange tension in the air. He knew who I was before I even walked in. It was there, at that very moment, that I understood that this was not just about objects sold. It was about something bigger, something that came from long before, something that involved my family in a way that I still didn't understand. And for the first time, I felt like I was about to discover a truth that would change everything. And before we continue, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, so you follow this turning point that is about to happen in Helena's life. because nothing will be the same as before." Murillo stared at me for a few seconds, as if he was trying to decide whether to run away or talk. I felt my heart beat in my ear, too loud. I repeated that the blue vase he bought was mine, that it had disappeared from my house without my authorization. My voice came out firm, but inside I was shattered, struggling not to look fragile in front of him. He took a deep breath and asked me to wait a minute. He turned and went to the back of the store, leaving me alone surrounded by objects that seemed to be silent witnesses. As he disappeared behind a curtain, I ran my fingers over a shelf, wondering how many of those pieces had stories similar to mine. Stories of someone who lost something more than a simple object. When he returned, he had the vase in his hands, wrapped too carefully for someone who only sees the item as a commodity. He placed it on the counter and looked at me with an expression that was difficult to decipher. I asked him where he had gotten it. He hesitated before mentioning my daughter's name. The ground seemed to move under my feet. Hearing Tanya's name in that context made me want to sit down, but I remained standing, holding his gaze. I asked him if he knew that it was theft, that those things were mine and were not for sale. He averted his eyes to the vase, as if embarrassed. He said that he believed that everything was authorized, that the saleswoman had claimed to have her mother's consent. That word, consent, cut me like a razor. I had never authorized anything, never signed anything, never agreed to sell the memories of my life. Murillo seemed sincere, but I didn't know if I could trust him. There was something in that look, a weight that did not match a simple salesperson deceived by a customer. He then asked if we could talk calmly, said there were more things I needed to know. That put me on alert. My instinct screamed for me to leave, but another part of me, tired of being kept in the dark, wanted to hear every word, even if it was too painful, even if it destroyed me. I asked him to get straight to the point, but he just said it wasn't a subject for the store counter. He offered to accompany me to the city hall, if I wanted, to better understand the situation of the house. The way he spoke sounded like someone who carried guilt, not just for the objects, but for something bigger, something that was still hidden. The idea of accepting help from a stranger terrified me, but at the same time, I couldn't remember the last time someone had offered to be by my side without asking for anything in return. There was a discreet humanity in his gestures, a strange care. I asked him why he cared so much. He just replied that he owed it to me, even though I didn't know why. I left the store with the vase in my arms, as if rescuing a piece of herself. Murillo stood at the door, watching me leave with a look that mixed regret and responsibility. As I walked back home, I felt that I had not recovered just one object. I had found the end of an old thread, which, if pulled, could unravel the whole plot of my life. When I walked through the gate and into my house, everything seemed different. The furniture, the walls, the memories. It was as if everything inside was waiting to be questioned. I put the vase in the place it should never have left and promised myself that I would not let anything disappear without answers. I spent the whole afternoon walking around the house like an amateur investigator. I opened drawers that I hadn't touched in years, pulled boxes from the top of the closet, rummaged through old folders. I was not only looking for objects, I was looking for meaning. I needed to understand how long my life was being used without my knowledge, how long I had become an extra within my own story. In the back of my bedroom closet, I found a leather briefcase that I hadn't seen since my husband died. It was hidden behind piles of sheets, as if someone had put it there on purpose. As I touched her, I felt a pang of longing and fear. I opened it carefully, as if inside there was a sleeping animal that could wake up and bite me. There were old receipts, strange contracts, account statements that I never knew existed. Some papers had my husband's name next to a woman I didn't know. There were also notes about monthly payments, different addresses, values too high for our standard of living. I was dizzy, as if the air had been ripped out of the room. I found, among the documents, 2 letters yellowed by time. The handwriting was not mine, nor his, it was someone else's. The way he called him, the intimacy of the words, the way he mentioned the other family made me feel like I had been slapped from the past. My husband, the man I had idealized for so many years, had led a life I never imagined. I sat on the edge of the bed with the letters in my hands, the tears falling without me being able to hold back. It wasn't just about Tanya selling my things. It was about a chain of secrets and lies that came from long before her. It was about years when I lived in ignorance, believing in a solid marriage, while another story took place in the shadows. My chest hurt, but along with the pain a new kind of revolt was born. Not only because she was deceived, but because she was treated as someone unable to bear the truth. By hiding that from me, they also denied me the right to decide, to choose, to fight. They turned me into a delicate figurine on a bookshelf, useful only to decorate a perfect family facade. It was in this state that the phone rang again. I thought about ignoring it, but I ended up complying. It was Murillo. He asked if I was okay, and the concern in his voice rang too true to be staged. He said that he really needed to talk to me, that there were things that could no longer be postponed. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, undecided. I replied that it was not a good time, that I was tired, that I needed time to assimilate everything. He insisted gently, saying that part of what I was discovering passed through him. She said she had met my husband in a way I didn't imagine. Those words made me freeze completely. I felt that the world was turning again. I declined the invitation to meet him that day, but I agreed to think about it and give an answer soon. When I hung up, I got the feeling that I was trying to hold a cracked dam with my hands. The documents, the letters, the sales, the house at risk, everything seemed connected, and I knew that the longer I took to face this truth, the more it would grow. I kept the papers again, but this time in a place where only I would know. Not for fear of seeing them, but for fear that someone would try to take them away from me. The night fell heavy, and I lay down unable to close my eyes for long. As I looked at the dark ceiling, I understood that this was just the beginning of the collapse. And that, when everything fell completely, I would need to be ready to survive the rubble. The next day, I woke up with the feeling that I was living in another universe, as if my own house had become a labyrinth full of doors that I had never opened. The weight of the papers found in the folder did not leave my chest. I needed to understand how far that lie went, how far my husband had built a double life while I took care of our house with the naivety of someone who believes in love. It was humiliating to admit this even to myself. I spent hours looking again at every document, every signature, every receipt that bore his name. There were payments made regularly to a woman named Clara, and the existence of an address I had never heard of before. The dates coincided with periods when he traveled for work. I began to remember every excuse he gave, every meeting he claimed to have, and I felt a knot of disgust and sadness form in my stomach. It was impossible to deny the evidence. Among the papers, I also found proof of more recent transfers, dated shortly before his death. This disconcerted me deeply. Why did he keep hiding it until the end? Why did you never feel that I deserved at least the truth? The betrayal was not only marital, it was emotional, historical, voluntary. He decided who I could be, deciding what I could know. And this revolted me in an unprecedented way. I held the letters again, rereading passages already memorized. The woman spoke of a son, mentioned our girl, as if he had another whole family replacing me in a parallel world. I felt my hands tremble. The family that I built, that I protected, that I believed to be solid, perhaps it had never existed. Maybe I would have loved it alone. The idea that Tanya could know something about this terrified me. What if she knew about the second family? What if she had discovered his old debts and was trying to protect herself at my expense? Or worse, what if she was trying to push me away from everything to prevent me from finding out the full truth? The questions came like flames, burning my reasoning. I closed the briefcase tightly, as if I could imprison the pain it contained. I realized that I needed to organize my thoughts, but each attempt was swallowed up by a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't control. The house seemed to shrink around me, choking me with memories that now sounded false. Nothing else seemed reliable. It was then that I remembered the call from the city hall. The debts could be connected to the second family. The documents used for the sale of the house may have been part of the same problem. Or maybe Tanya was trying to get rid of something she thought I couldn't bear to face. The truth is that, at that moment, everything and everyone seemed suspicious in my eyes. I decided to put everything inside a large bag, hiding the briefcase as if it were a forbidden artifact. If it fell into the wrong hands, it could destroy me even more. I needed to maintain control, even if it was the last trace of lucidity I had. Holding the bag close to my chest gave me a fragile sense of protection. I sat at the kitchen table, holding a hot mug, trying to work out the next step. The room was too quiet, and that silence screamed the truths I didn't want to hear. I knew I needed to face Murillo. He knew something that connected my husband, my daughter, and that collapse I was experiencing. And I needed to listen, before it was too late. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and accepted what I had been avoiding from the beginning. My life was falling apart stone by stone, and I could no longer ignore the noise. I had to keep investigating, even if every discovery was a blow because, deep down, I already understood. There was no going back. The truth was coming, and I would have to face it head-on. At the end of the afternoon, I took courage and called Murillo. His voice on the phone sounded relieved, as if he was waiting for me to get in touch. We agreed to meet in the neighborhood square, a neutral, open place, where I would feel less vulnerable. I walked there slowly, holding the bag to my chest, trying to keep steady in the steps that seemed to falter with each memory of what I had discovered. When I saw him sitting on the bench, looking at the floor, I felt a strange shiver. He seemed to carry a heavier weight than mine, as if guilt consumed him. I sat next to him, keeping some distance, and asked him not to surround the subject. He said I deserved the truth, and that I couldn't take any more lies. My voice came out firm, but my fingers trembled in my lap. Murillo took a deep breath before starting. She said that she met my husband many years ago, as a client of the office where he worked. He said that, at that time, he already had financial problems and that there was a second family involved. I heard the word second and felt my stomach turn. It was like hearing the confirmation of something I didn't want to believe even in the face of the evidence. He explained that the case became complicated when my husband, no longer able to support both houses, accumulated debts in a false name, using manipulated documents. And, after I died, many of these debts were redirected to me for lack of legal proof. I clasped my hands against my knees, trying to control the feeling that I was going to pass out right there on the bench. I asked about the woman in the letters. He nodded ruefully. He said that she existed, that for a long time she received financial help from him, and that there was, yes, a child involved. The letters were not an exaggeration, it was real. Part of me wanted to scream, another wanted to run, but I stood there, motionless, trapped in the body of a woman who was discovering that she had lived in the dark for decades. Murillo continued, saying that he started buying my objects when he saw some of them being advertised. He recognized them. He recognized it because they were also in the other house. I froze. Those objects had circulated between two lives that should never have touched. Each piece sold was a fragment of a giant lie that my husband devised and that was now exploding over me. I asked why Tanya was involved. His face tensed. She said that, apparently, she had recently discovered part of the truth and panicked. Instead of telling me, she decided to sell my belongings and use the money to try to figure it all out herself, or to silence something only she knew. The worst part was imagining that she believed I couldn't handle the truth. As if I was as fragile as everyone always assumed. My whole body trembled when he finished. The world seemed to have been shattered at my feet. My marriage was a farce. My daughter betrayed me to cover up another betrayal, and strangers knew more about my life than I ever did. Shame, anger, and sadness fought within me, and none of them won, because they were all true. Murillo put his hand on the shoulder of the bench, careful not to touch me, and said he would help me face what was coming. He said that I needed to prepare because, in addition to the debts, there was a process beginning, something I had not seen coming. I felt my legs weaken. My life wasn't just falling apart, was about to collapse completely. When I got up to leave, I felt a new kind of strength inside me, not the strength of those who are well, but of those who have lost enough to no longer fear the rest. I walked back home with firm steps, holding the weight of the truth, and the quiet determination that I would no longer be allowed to live in darkness. I arrived home carrying not only the bag with the documents, but also the weight of Murillo's revelations. I closed the door slowly, as if the noise might wake up some monster hiding in the walls. I sat at the kitchen table, put my bag next to it, and stared at my phone, feeling a mixture of anger and fear. I knew I needed to talk to Tanya, but this time, not like the mother asking for attention, rather, as someone demanding respect. I dialed her number with bated breath. She answered after a few touches, with that usual hurried tone. Before I could say much, I asked him to come to my house that night. She said it was urgent, that it was about me, about her father. There was a silence on the other side, followed by an angry sigh. She asked if she really needed it, if it couldn't be another day. I replied firmly, no, it's today, and I hung up before she tried to escape. While I waited, I arranged the room as if preparing a stage for an important play. I put the documents on the coffee table, the letters, some receipts, the notice from the city hall. Each paper there was a proof, a fragment of the truth I had been forced to discover. I didn't know exactly how the conversation was going to happen, but I was sure of one thing. I wouldn't let anyone talk over me anymore. When Tanya arrived, she knocked on the door impatiently, as if she were doing a favor. I opened it and saw her enter without looking at me properly, fiddling with her cell phone, rolling her eyes. She asked what all that urgency was. I invited her to sit down. She threw herself on the couch, crossing her arms. The girl who once ran through the rooms now looked at me as if I were a problem to be solved quickly. Without saying anything, I pushed the letters in her direction. His eyes quickly passed through the first lines, and I saw the color disappear from his face. Then I showed the receipts, the contracts, the transfers. I told him that I had spoken to Murillo, that I knew about her father's second family, the debts, the manipulation of documents. Every word of mine seemed to push her into a corner where there was no way out. She tried to deny it at first, as she always did. He said that I was interpreting it wrong, that I should have understood everything changed, that Murillo was not reliable. But as I presented more evidence, her tone changed. The voice became lower, the answers shorter, until, finally, she collapsed on the couch, holding her head in her hands, as if the world was collapsing on her too. Between suppressed tears, Tanya confessed that she discovered part of the truth a few months ago. He found an old contact of Clara's, learned about the existence of the other family, the pressure of debts. He said that he panicked, that he felt shame, anger, disgust, and that, instead of telling me, she decided to solve it herself. He sold my objects, moved my documents, spoke on my behalf, all without me knowing, as if I were unable to bear the truth. She tried to justify it, saying that she was afraid of seeing me suffer, that she thought she would do the right thing by sparing me the details. But I realized, between the lines, that there was also a desire for control, to keep the reins of the situation. My pain had been used as an excuse for her to make decisions for me. Again, I was treated as someone fragile, who needed to be kept in the dark. I listened to it all in silence, feeling the tears flow, but not allowing my voice to tremble. When she finished, I calmly asked her why she never believed I was strong enough to hear the truth. She did not know how to answer. He only repeated that he thought it was better that way. I stared at my daughter, and for the first time, I felt that there was a chasm between us that hadn't begun that day. Before she left, I showed her the notification from the city hall and asked her if she knew about the sale of the house. She hesitated for a second, and that second was the confirmation I needed. Tanya tried to change the subject, to say that it was just any procedure, that everything was under control. But I no longer believed anything that came out of her mouth. The girl I once trusted was now part of the threat I had to face. When I closed the door behind her, my heart was in pieces. But in the midst of the pain, there was a new spark burning inside me. I was tired of being treated like an extra in my own life. If Tanya didn't trust my strength, I would show her, and everyone, what I was capable of. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes but clearer minds. It was as if, after so long living in fog, I could finally see the shapes of things. It still hurt, of course. The betrayal, the lie, the weight of my husband's past and my daughter's decisions. But now, the pain was accompanied by something new, indignation. And indignation has an advantage, it doesn't let us stand still. While having coffee, I heard the postman calling at the gate. I got up slowly, feeling my body heavy, and went there. He handed me an official envelope, one of those that already make the heart tighten just by looking at it. I signed without saying anything, thanked him in a trembling voice, and went back inside with the paper in my hands, as if I were holding a bomb about to explode. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope carefully. Inside, there was a formal notification about a scheduled hearing. The document said that, due to old debts linked to my name, there was a request for the use of the house as collateral. And, to top it off, there was an addendum mentioning a possible assessment of my financial and mental management capacity. In other words, someone was suggesting that I might not be able to take care of my own life. I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, about control, about someone trying to take away not only my home, but my autonomy, freedom, dignity. It was as if my entire existence was being put on trial. A part of me wanted to collapse. The other, more recent, refused. I immediately thought of Tanya. That idea of, "I'm worried about you, Mom, you're confused," now took on a bitter taste. Was she behind that suggestion of inability? Did he intend to interdict me to have total control over everything? The possibility made me nauseous. The daughter I raised, who I protected, was now able to shove me into a corner and lock the door. I picked up the phone with shaky hands and called Murillo. When he answered, I explained about the document, reading a few excerpts aloud. He was silent for a moment, then spoke firmly. He said that he already imagined that something like this could happen, that is why he wanted to alert me urgently. He recommended that I not go alone to the hearing and offered to help me with a lawyer friend of his. For the first time in days, I felt that I was not totally helpless. I agreed to meet him later that day. I hung up and stared around the kitchen, watching every detail as if it were the last time I would see them. The old tile, the table marked by time, the wall clock that sometimes advanced, sometimes delayed, but never failed to mark my routine. The idea of losing all that tightened my chest, but at the same time, it awakened something even stronger, an absolute refusal. I ran my hand over the documents scattered on the table, organizing them into piles. Notifications, letters, receipts, everything now seemed to be part of the same plot. I realized that for many years, I had left it to others to decide what I needed to know and what I didn't need. Now, it was different. I would use every role, every proof, every detail, to tell my side of the story. Not as a confused old woman, but as the mistress of the house, of memory and of her own voice. Before leaving to meet Murillo, I looked at myself in the mirror in the hallway. I saw the wrinkles, the thinning hair, the tired eyes. But I also saw something new, a firmness that I did not recognize. The woman reflected there could be hurt, betrayed, afraid, but she was not defeated, not by a long shot. I adjusted my coat, took a deep breath, and left, as if going to a battlefield, not with weapons, but with the truth in my hands. As I walked down the street towards the meeting point, I felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and courage. The legal threat was real, heavy, frightening. They could try to take away my house, my reputation, even my autonomy. But for the first time, I understood that I had something that no one could take away, the decision to fight. And even though I lost a lot in the process, one thing I promised myself I wouldn't lose anymore, myself. When I found Murillo in front of my lawyer friend's office, I felt my legs hesitate for a second. He nodded to me with a serious but welcoming countenance, like someone who understands the gravity of what was to come. We entered together, and the quiet environment, full of dark wood bookshelves, made me feel smaller than I already felt. Still, there was something there that I hadn't felt in a long time, protection. The lawyer, Dr. Umberto, stood up to greet me firmly. His gaze was attentive, analyzing my every gesture without judgment. I told my story calmly, taking a deep breath between one memory and another, trying not to let my voice weaken. He listened without interrupting, as if he were assembling the pieces of a puzzle that I myself have never seen in its entirety. When I mentioned the possibility of interdiction, he leaned forward, saying that it was too serious to ignore. He explained to me that if anyone really raised this suspicion, I would have to defend myself from something that went beyond the financial issue. That moved me deeply, as if someone had tried to take away not only my house, but my identity. He assured that he would not let that happen. Murillo, sitting next to me, seemed to carry part of my anguish. He said little, but when he did, it always seemed at the right time. She revealed to the lawyer that there were old documents from my husband indicating fraud, secret accounts, and even signature manipulation. I watched this man, wondering when a stranger came to know more about my life than my own daughter. Dr. Umberto said he needed to see everything I had found. I opened the bag with trembling hands and placed the briefcase on the table. The two pored over the papers, pointing out dates, inconsistencies, irregularities. Seeing those men studying my pain as legal evidence was surreal, but at the same time, I felt a breath of hope. For the first time, I had someone fighting by my side. The lawyer explained that I needed to gather witnesses that I was lucid, active, and aware of my life. It was strange to have to prove sanity, as if my decades of routine were insufficient in the face of a silent accusation. But I accepted. Murillo then suggested talking to my neighbor, Donna Ruth, who always saw me taking care of the garden, going to the market, making decisions alone. I returned home with Murillo accompanying me to the gate. He walked by my side gently, without invading my space, but giving me security. It was as if he understood that, at that moment, any sudden touch could break me. I thanked him for everything, and he just said he was doing what he should, as if he carried an effective debt with me that I still didn't fully understand. When I entered the house, I found Donna Ruth leaning against the window, as she always did in the late afternoon. I called her and told her part of the situation. She squeezed my arms tightly, saying she would witness whatever it took. "I know very well who you are, Helena. Don't let them shut you up," she told me, and her words lodged inside me like a warm blanket on a cold night. When I closed the door, I felt that for the first time in weeks, I wasn't completely alone. There was a lawyer, a repentant accountant, and an attentive neighbor, 3 people who believed in me when my own daughter doubted. It was a bittersweet feeling, but also strengthened. Maybe I was starting to rebuild myself, even in the midst of the earthquake. Before going to sleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. The fight would be great, I knew. But there, in that instant, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. The feeling that there was a real chance to win. And, with that feeling, I finally managed to sleep. I woke up the next day with a determination that surprised me. It was as if, after so long being pushed into the shadows, I had found an inner spotlight that finally lit my way. I prepared coffee, set the table, and started to separate the documents as the lawyer directed. Each roll I organized seemed to recover a piece of my voice. Murillo arrived around 10 in the morning. He brought a larger folder, with dividers and labels, explaining that he would help us put everything in order. I sat with him in the living room, while the sun pierced the curtain and illuminated the table full of memories and secrets. He worked with care and respect, as if he understood that each roll there was not just evidence, but part of a life I was trying to resume. We separated tax documents from personal letters, proof of sale of objects, records of suspicious movements, and even messages exchanged in online ads. Everything was taking shape. It was like assembling a body, the body of truth, finally revealed. Murillo explained the logic behind each organization, and I absorbed everything with a speed that not even I expected. Donna Ruth appeared after lunch, bringing cornmeal cake as if it were an incentive for the war we were fighting. She sat down with us and shared details that could serve as a testimony. How many times she saw me taking care of my bills, writing everything down in notebooks, making decisions on my own, going to the bank without help. Each report of hers was one more stone in the wall I was building to protect my autonomy. As Donna Ruth spoke, I realized something important. I was not the fragile woman that everyone assumed. I had been strong all my life. I just hadn't realized it because I used to being underestimated. That room, full of papers, neighbors, unlikely allies, all that proved that I still had much more strength than I imagined. The lawyer called us asking us to gather any recent medical records as well, to prove my mental and physical health. I went to my exam drawer and found reports, prescriptions, consultations. None indicated any cognitive problem. On the contrary, my doctors have always praised my lucidity. Attaching those documents gave me a sense of early victory. In the late afternoon, Murillo began to prepare a report that would be delivered to the lawyer the next day. I watched him organizing the sheets with such dedication that, for a moment, I felt a tightness in my heart, not of pain, but of gratitude. Someone was finally fighting for me, and not because they had to, but because they chose to. It moved me more than I care to admit. When everything was ready, I sat in silence for a few minutes, looking at the set of evidence gathered on the table. It was impressive to realize how, from the ruins of my life, something solid was emerging. It wasn't just a legal case, it was the reconstruction of my own history, piece by piece, truth by truth. Murillo was already getting up to leave when I turned to him and said, in a choked voice, that I didn't know how to thank him. He smiled sadly, as if carrying a silent past, and replied only, "You're doing this for you, Helena. I'm just by your side." And I felt, at that moment, that I was no longer a victim. I was someone who struggled. When the door closed behind him, I went back to the center of the room, looked at all those papers, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride. Not of what I discovered, not of what I suffered, but of what I began to become. The woman I always should have been, and who was now finally emerging. I woke up on the day of the hearing with my heart beating as if I was trying to escape my chest. I put on the clothes I had separated the night before, a simple blouse and a jacket that made me feel more protected. As I looked in the mirror, I saw not only a woman aged by time, but someone who had carried a lifetime of silences and had finally found the courage to break them. I took a deep breath and took the folder with the evidence. Murillo was waiting for me on the sidewalk, punctual as always. He offered me his arm discreetly, and I accepted, not out of fragility, but because of the feeling of being accompanied in something I should never have faced alone. The lawyer met us at the entrance of the forum building, greeting me firmly. He said I was prepared, and for the first time, I also believed that. As I entered the courtroom, I felt a weight in the air, as if all the walls were steeped in judgments I didn't know I deserved. Tanya was there, sitting on the other side of the table, avoiding looking at me. She seemed smaller than usual, but still carried that defensive posture that hurt me more than any words. I felt my heart tighten, but I kept my gaze steady. The judge began the session by asking for explanations about the debts, the attempt to sell the house and, above all, the doubt about my mental capacity. Hearing it said out loud was like getting a blow to the stomach. I kept myself straight in the chair, even though my hands were cold. The lawyer began to speak for me, explaining every detail precisely, showing papers that proved my lucidity and autonomy. When it was my turn to speak, the room fell silent. I took a deep breath and told, with a firm voice, everything I had experienced in the last few weeks. I told them about the disappearing objects, about the call from the city hall, about my husband's found documents, about the second family, about how my daughter made decisions on my behalf without my permission. They were painful but liberating words. I was finally resuming my narrative. Tanya tried to defend herself, saying that she was only protecting me, that I was fragile, that I couldn't bear to know the truth. The judge asked her to explain why she used my name and documents without authorization. She faltered, stammered, and I saw in her eyes the exact moment she realized she had gone too far. Murillo also testified, confirming my husband's debts and past, and explaining his participation in all of this. Donna Ruth was called next. She entered with a decisive posture and said, in front of everyone, that I was perfectly capable of taking care of my life. He spoke of my routine, my decisions, my lucidity. His words were so direct and true that I felt a warmth in my chest. It was as if she was there, not only as a neighbor, but as the guardian of a version of me that no one else saw. The judge analyzed all the documents, listened to all the parties and made a statement that I will never forget. He stated that there was no indication of incapacity on my part, that the attempts to sell were irregular and that I was the only one legally responsible for the house. He ordered an investigation into the misuse of my documents and closed the hearing with a stern warning. When I left the room, my legs were shaking, but for another reason, relief. I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had proven, to them and to myself, that I was still the owner of my life. I felt such a strong wave of emotion that I had to lean on the wall of the hallway. Murillo and the lawyer were by my side, watching me with respect. For the first time, I felt whole. The sun outside seemed brighter than it had been in the last few days, as if the world had grown lighter. The pain still existed, of course, but there was something new sprouting in its place, strength. A strength that I never imagined I had, but that has always been there, waiting for the right moment to flourish. And that moment had finally come. When I got home after the hearing, I walked slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture as if returning from a long war. Nothing there had really changed, and yet everything looked different. Maybe I was the one who had changed. I was no longer the scared woman who answered calls trembling. I had faced my own daughter, my past, and a system that tried to silence me, and I remained standing. I sat in the armchair in the living room and let the silence envelop me. For the first time, that silence did not seem threatening to me. It felt, in fact, like a well-deserved break after so much noise. I took the folder with the documents and put it on the coffee table. I knew there would still be a lot to work out, but now I had choices. Something that, for a long time, was taken away from me. Later, Tanya showed up unannounced. She entered slowly, as if walking on broken glass. When our eyes met, I saw guilt, fear, despair, but also a timid attempt at reconciliation. She sat in front of me and began to speak in a choked voice. She said she never wanted to hurt me, that she was lost, that she tried to solve everything on her own and ended up destroying more than she saved. I listened in silence, feeling each word beat in my chest like a distant echo. Part of me wanted to hug her, to tell her that everything was fine, that I understood. But another part, the wounded and finally awakened part, knew that it was not that simple. Love was still there, but trust, this one had been broken in a way that cannot be fixed with excuses. Tanya asked for forgiveness, but she didn't ask to regain control of my life. That, for me, was the only honesty at that moment. I took a deep breath and said that I needed time, that it still hurt too much, that I didn't know when, or if, our relationship would go back to what it was. She cried, nodded, and left without insisting. It was the first time he didn't try to silence me with justifications. After she left, I realized how much the truth comes at a high price. I had my home, my autonomy and my dignity back, but I had lost the idealized image of my family. I lost the innocence of believing that my husband had been the man I imagined. I lost a part of my daughter that may never come back. But instead, I gained something I never fully had, myself. Murillo called me at the end of the day to find out how I was. His voice had a care that touched me deeply. I thanked him for everything and said I wouldn't know how I would have gotten through it without his help. He replied, softly, that I myself had done the hardest work, believing in myself. When I hung up, I kept thinking about how important this man had become in my life. In the evening, I made tea and sat in the backyard, watching the sky darken. There was something poetic about ending the day like this, in silence, feeling the wind touch my face as if to say that life goes on. The pain was there, but it didn't overwhelm me. And the strength was there, too, reminding me that I had survived something I never thought I would face. I kept thinking about everything the judge said, everything I heard, everything I had to assimilate, and I realized that, even with the pain, I was at peace for the first time in a long time. Not a perfect peace, but a possible peace. A peace built on ruins, but solid enough to sustain what was to come. After so many years of being treated as fragile, I finally knew who I was, a woman capable of facing the truth, no matter how hard it was. And as I looked at the dark sky, I felt something inside me slowly rebuild itself, like an old wall that, after cracking, finally gets new cement. I was remaking myself, and that was enough. The days following the hearing passed like a slow breeze, carrying remnants of a weight I still couldn't name. It was strange to wake up in the morning and feel more lightness than fear. The house seemed to breathe along with me, as if it had finally been freed from the shadows it had carried for so many years. He walked through the rooms carefully, almost reverently, as if thanking the home for not having collapsed along with everything around. I began to organize the objects that had been recovered. Some were broken, others intact, others I chose not to bring back. As I cared for each one, I realized that many of them had lost their old value, not because they were less beautiful, but because they no longer represented what they once represented. Perhaps this was also reconstruction, learning to look at things with new eyes, without the distorted lens of illusion. In the midst of this, I discovered something unexpected inside me, the desire to create something new. I saw in some damaged objects the opportunity to restore them, to give them a second life, and, almost naturally, I started to set up a small studio in the back room. It was simple, modest, but it was mine. A space that was not taken away, inherited, or pushed from me. I had created it with my own hands. The neighbors started passing by to see what I was doing. Donna Ruth, always the first, said that my hands had a special way with old things. Others commissioned small restorations, nothing grandiose, but enough to give me the feeling that I was still useful, productive, alive. It was strange to think that, after all the chaos, something so beautiful could be born. Tanya appeared a few times, always knocking on the door before entering, a detail that she did not respect before. Her posture was different, more hesitant, more humble, as if each visit was a silent attempt to redeem herself. I received it, of course, but there was a wall between us that couldn't be broken down so quickly. The love was there, but the trust. She still slept in another room. On one of these visits, she brought me an empty picture frame. He said that, whenever I wanted, we could put a picture of us there. I didn't answer at the time. I just placed the object on the studio table. It was a beautiful gesture, but also loaded with a pain that has not yet healed. Maybe one day the photo will come, maybe not, and that didn't scare me anymore. Murillo also remained present, but always with respect, always asking permission to approach. Sometimes he stopped by to help me organize papers, other times just to find out how I was doing. There was something sincere about that care, something I couldn't name, but that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Not as a fragile woman, but as someone strong, whole. However, even with these presences around me, I found that the most important part of my reconstruction happened in silence. At that time of day when I would sit in the backyard with a cup of tea and watch the wind shake the leaves. It was there that I understood that I would not go back to who I was before, and that this was not a loss, but a rebirth. A more conscious, firmer, truer version of me. When I finished my first restored piece, a simple vase that had arrived cracked, I felt something inside me line up, as if I too were being carefully patched up. I placed it in the living room window, where the light hit softly at dusk. He wasn't perfect. Me neither. But we had both survived the cracks, and now we were shining in a new way. That night, when I turned off the lights, I stopped for a moment at the door of the living room and looked at everything around me. I realized, with a deep peace, that my life wasn't over when I found out about the betrayal. It had started there. The moment the lie fell, I could finally see myself without shadows. And for the first time in many years, I felt proud of the woman I had become, not fragile, not lost, not silenced, but reborn from the chaos itself, whole and mine. And now I want to know from you, what shocked you the most about this story? The daughter's attitude? Her husband's secret? Or the strength that Helena found in the midst of so much pain? Write your opinion here in the comments. I read everything with great affection. And if you want more stories like this, leave your like and share it with someone who will also be moved.